this is the risk assessment dashboard I just completed today. In fact, I did that live on TikTok, and those who were privileged to watch me start, some of them actually stood and waited for me to complete it. So I did this in just 2 hours, and that's quite exciting because that relieves me of a lot more time to focus on the last project for this weekend. So in case you've been following us, you're aware that we have a risk management dashboard which is in Power BI. We even have an Excel version, and we did some analysis focused on Power BI with a lot of dashboards. All right, so in case you have not seen, you can go to my channel and have a look. But that's one of the biggest dashboards that we ever created. But this one is a simple risk assessment dashboard, very, very simple. Now this dashboard, we're looking at a number of risks that have been assessed, the initial risk score prior to mitigation, the percentage reduction, and then the residual risk score after mitigation. And we have the risk levels before mitigation, risk levels after mitigation, and then we have the various activity or the various hazards within the extreme risk levels. So we are literally looking at their risk score that is above the threshold for extreme risk. And so anything above the threshold for extreme risk, above the minimum threshold, we are literally counting them here, or we are representing them here, and then we can all look at it properly in terms of the extent to which we've reduced a risk. Okay, so basically it is a simple risk assessment dashboard that everybody literally have, and your risk assessment dashboard will have the initial risk analysis with a risk rating, and then the residual risk analysis with a risk rating. So the task for me in this video was basically to ensure that the risk matrix, or sorry, the risk analysis is actually based on the combination of likelihood and severity levels to estimate the risk rating. Initially it was just like a normal cell that they had to manually enter figures, and so they could enter 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then the consequence also they will enter 3, 4, 5, and over here it was not even a combination of the two. It was literally a drop down list which wasn't consistent with the combination of the likelihood and the consequence, and so I needed to quickly create the drop down list. So what I did was that I had to come here. So as you can see over here was literally pictures. So this thing that you see here are pictures. These are just screenshots, and so I had to create proper cell entries within this range to represent this so that we can actually reference the cells. All right, so what I did was that I literally created a drop down list which is referencing this for the likelihood. Okay, I've actually protected the sheet, and then we did the same thing for the severity, right, or the consequence. And then over here we use index and match function. So index and match function to sort of do the combination. So every time they select this and this, they're gonna get the rating. So that's exactly what I did to streamline the process so that the combination will be consistent in estimating the risk ratings. And then I did the same thing for the residual risk. All right, so that was the first part of the task, and then the other part was how do I extract insight from this data set. Okay, so in terms of extracting insights, I rather consider the fact that every entry, one complete row, is a record of a risk assessment activity. The fact that you looked at one hazard, you identify, or one type of task, you identify all the hazards that are relevant or applicable to that task, looking at the persons responsible, doing your risk analysis based on this task, and then all the consequence, and then the mitigations and everything, and then the initial risk analysis, residual risk analysis to estimate, to come out with a conclusion that your risk is probably acceptable. All right, and so the number of records in here indicates the number of risks that have been assessed, because we need to find a way of making it objective. This is a subjective exercise, but whenever we're extracting insights, we need to bring some high level of objectivity to it. And so the number of records is literally the number of risk assessment that has been done. And then in terms of the risk rating, the focus is on the risk rating or the risk level, because whenever you do your risk ratings, like combination, whatever you have here is a risk level. Okay, so we can say ratings are the number, the levels are basically whether high, medium, and low. So the rating. So we've actually integrated the ratings right in there. So this combination is giving us 10. But that 10, we are not going to see it. We're only seeing the risk levels. Okay. And so we had to find a way of estimating the levels of the risk. And this is something that we've already explained in our risk management tutorial when we were when I was doing the video, that the maximum risk level is 25 and the lowest is 1. So if someone scored 25 out of 25, what is the risk score here? The risk score is 100%. Why? Because 25 divided by 25 is 100%. That is extreme risk. But if you score low, which is the 1, the very least of the low, that's 1 divided by the 25, and that gives you a certain score. So those scores that you are supposed to estimate, you have them here. And so each risk level with a respective rating, with a respective score, is over here. And so we can tell the various thresholds for low, medium, or moderate, high, and extreme. You can tell over here. And so you can see that the least threshold, the minimum threshold for low is 4%. The minimum threshold for moderate is 16%. The minimum threshold for high is 32%. The minimum threshold for extreme is 60%. So what it means is that if you score this, you're going to get 4%. If you score this, you're going to get 100%. And that's exactly what we did. So we created a helper column. It's hidden here. I can unhide it. Okay, let me just unhide it. So we created a helper column which we will use to pull all those scores. So based on the rating, so we did it for initial risk score and residual risk score. So based on the rating, so if it is low, right, this is residual. So if it is low, right, if it is high, which is 9, the high with the rating 9 is going to return 36%. So this is what we have here. The 9 is 36%. So we literally use VLOOKUP to bring in all these values over here so that they are part of the Excel table. So what we did was that we converted this whole thing to an Excel table so that it will be part of the pivot table field list, because all these column headers will be part of the field list in pivot table, so it's within the data model. So after creating that, then I loaded it into Power Query, which is just for us to streamline things and clean and check the quality of the data and everything, right? So when we go into Power Query, we literally will look at the data sets there and see what changes we can make just to make sure that everything looks perfect. Okay, so I'll just go in there right now and we'll have a look at it. Okay, and then we look at the data set, everything is okay, there are no issues. We literally just had to rename some of the column headers so that they are consistent with how we intend to do some calculations. And then what I do was that I had to extract the high, medium, and low from these type of text with a rating by it, because we don't want to be adding the ratings to it. We simply want to extract all these other stuff. That's focus on the risk levels. So the low, the moderate, the high, all these stuff, we have to extract them here because we just want the risk levels, not the risk levels together with the rating. Okay, so I did that for initial level and the residual level. And this one, you do it very simple. You just come to add column and you choose column from example. It's going to add another column, and then you just type in, you start typing in the high, whatever you see in the selected column, just type it in there. It's going to auto populate. It's just like a flash fill. So that's pretty much what I did, and I just loaded it to the data model just because I don't want this to go into the Excel sheet. Okay, I don't want this to go into the Excel sheet. All right, and so I did some calculations using explicit measures, because this one, once you have it in the data model, you could just go ahead and create your pivot table and then start to bring in the values, the column headers or the fields to nicely arrange your data. But we didn't want to do that. You can see there are just a few measures that we calculated. We calculated the number of risk, which is simply count rows of the source data, which is the name of our query. And then we did the initial risk score, which is just an average of the column where we have the initial risk score. And then we also do the residual risk score, which is just the average of the residual risk score. And then we did the difference, the percentage risk reduction, which is basically the difference between the residual and then the initial divided by the initial. That's literally it. And then we were able to estimate the score. So that's pretty much it, and the difference. So we brought in all those KPIs. So they are actually on a calculation sheet, right? So we did all of that here. Within the calculation, you see number of risk ID, initial, residual, percentage reduction, and then we estimated various risk levels before mitigation, after mitigation, the count, literally. And then we also filtered out, okay, within the pivot table, we just filtered out all the hazards or tasks that are above the minimum threshold of the extreme risk at the initial stage. And so we can see that from 60 all the way to 80, we've highlighted them here. They are all here. And then we have estimated, the residual risk is right here. And we can look at the percentage reduction, how far we're able to reduce them so that we could get a residual risk to a reasonable score. So that's pretty much it. We brought everything here on this amazing dashboard. And this dashboard doesn't have a slicer. We just don't want to introduce any slicer. It's just one static dashboard. Of course, it's dynamic based on the changes within the data set. So once there are any changes here and you refresh, it's going to update. So thank you all for your attention. I believe that you found this video very insightful, and I'm going to see you guys in another video. Bye for now. Cheers.